Hello, my name's Mr. Volkman and welcome again to another flipped video in this Washington State history course for 8th grade. Today we're going to be talking about the life and work that actually occurred in Oregon Territory. This is for chapter 3.2. This is going to be video A, and the next video after this will be video B. Let's move on. This flip video is going to be a little different than the previous ones in that I don't have a lot of extra pictures aside from the one you see here and the one over here. I spent the majority of my time creating this video using primary text, mainly journals, written by people who were settlers in this area. The majority of the journals I used was from Isaac Eby and his wife Rebecca Eby, who settled in Coupeville, would have been Oregon Territory, in 1851, and Rebecca came over around, I believe, was 1852 or 1851. So those are what I mainly used to show the happiness and the hardships that were used during these times. And you actually may get the opportunity to have Isaac himself, albeit not looking quite like this, and Rebecca herself, also not quite looking like this, read from their journal entries. Mr. Mint will also be reading some other journal entries as well. So let's continue on. One of the first causes of happiness that we can see when reading through primary sources is the fact that people felt like there was a lack of disease in Oregon Territory. They felt that their health improved greatly. Let's take a moment and let's actually hear from Isaac Eby. He wrote a letter to his brother who lives still over in Missouri. Is this thing on? I've never seen a box like this. I don't, hey look, it's me in the recording. I'm supposed to record now. Oh, okay, Mr. Volkman. I'm gonna read from you some excerpt from a letter I wrote my brother, Winfred, in 1851. Here I go. On account of health, the people here know not what sickness is. There are but 2 American graves on Puget Sound. All the family would enjoy such health and elasticity of spirits as they never knew before. The bracing effects of the sea breeze would soon resuscitate the emaciated forms on which disease had so long preyed. It has assuredly the most healthy climate in the world. Many persons now who have removed from state to state in search of health and found it not, are now hardy and robust, capable of performing any kind of labor. And this was said, or written I should say, by Mr. Isaac Statz in 1847. So as you can see from our reading from Mr. Isaac Eby and Mr. Mint doing his Mr. Isaac Statz impersonation, people felt like you could have a great health moving out to the Oregon Territory. And this was because back in the day, people felt that everyone got sick because of the bad, stinky odors from like rotting garbage or from sewage. They didn't realize that it was actually bacteria and viruses that made people sick. Now, I'm sure that garbage created bacteria and viruses that got people ill, but they thought it was the smell and the stench. And as we saw from Mr. Eby, the sea breeze he felt would make people feel better. Another reason for happiness would be the idea of getting wealth. And once again, let's listen to Mr. Eby read an excerpt from the letter he wrote to his brother in 1851. I wrote this letter to my brother, as I said. I was trying to encourage him to continue to come to Whidbey Island with me. Anyways, let me read it. Her, meaning the Oregon Territory, her wealth is in her great agricultural resources, in her lumbering, in her inexhaustible fisheries, and in her coal fields. It's me, Mr. Mint again. This was a letter written by Mr. Elijah Bristow in 1847 back to his family in Illinois. Wheat never fails. It will come up 3 years without sowing, and it is not known how much longer, but the last crop was the best. I have seen here the best that I have ever saw anywhere,
56 bushels per acre measured. Rust is not known. We have 2 crops of grass a year, for as soon as the fall rain sets in the grass springs up and continues green all winter. Ouch.
Now, in case you're not sure of what all these letters show what the wealth was from, these people were farmers. So if you're able to bring in a really good crop, and if you have extra crop left over after feeding your family, feeding your cattle, or any other animals you have, the rest you can sell and earn money, as Mr. Bristow, I think, was trying to show here. In terms of Mr. Eby, he's explaining all the other ways, other resources that could be used to increase your livelihood, to increase how well you're living, and to sell. Lastly, the happiness, one more time. We're actually going to hear from Rebecca Eby now, as she explains how community gatherings was a source of happiness.
I'm Rebecca Eby, and my husband Isaac told me it's safe to talk into this rectangle, so I'll just read briefly from my diary in 1852. Mrs. Crockett visited me today, and I spent my time very agreeably. And then again in 1852, I wrote this. This morning we all, Mr. Eby, myself, and the children, went to the J. Crockett and his lady, to Colonel Crockett's for the first time since they moved to their own claim. We had a very pleasant visit. Can I stop talking now, Isaac? Thank you.
By looking at the way Rebecca talked about the gatherings, we can definitely take from that meeting with other settlers was a great source of happiness for these people. She says very agreeably, very pleasant visit. You don't use those type of adjectives if you have a bad time. Now, everything wasn't all peachy keen and raindrops and rainbows and gumdrops. There were hardships. One of the hardships was just pure loneliness, as we're going to hear from Isaac and then from his wife, Rebecca.
Little background before I read my excerpt. I'd gone to Whidbey Island by myself without my family, my wife and my kids. So I wrote this to my brother, who was going to be bringing my family out when he came out to Whidbey Island. I wrote this to Winfred. I am more grateful to you for the kind interest you manifest towards Rebecca and my children. I shall never be able to repay you. It's me, Rebecca, again. My husband, Isaac, he left on a lot of trips. And so this is an example of how I felt when he left, and I wrote this in my diary. Mr. Eby started to Olympia today, and I am very lonely all day as the boys are hauling timber a great ways off.
So these settlers were lonely. In Isaac Eby's case, some people had left and gone ahead of their family to get their claim started, to have something built, while then the children of the wives came later. That way they didn't have to sleep in tents while the house was being built. So these husbands, these fathers were by themselves. It could have been for a year, maybe 2 years. And then once the family got there, the wives could be very lonely as well, as they're off by themselves. Maybe they'd have neighbors, maybe they didn't. In Rebecca's case, she had neighbors, but still her husband would be gone on long trips to get supplies. And that's very lonely on a mother, on a wife, as she's just there by herself with kids. Another hardship was now prepping land, as we are going to hear from Isaac, and again to his letter that he wrote to his brother Winfred.
And have dug about 5,000 cabbage plants set out. This ground I have dug up with a hoe. I have no oxen, no horse, no cow, no plow, no nothing but a hoe and strength and will to work.
As we saw from the excerpt from Isaac Eby, prepping the land, getting it ready to till, to put in your crops was a lot of work, especially if you didn't necessarily have the oxen to pull your plow. Not to mention, if you were in a claim that had a lot of trees, you had to chop the trees down. You had to get rid of all the ruts, all the roots from the stumps. And that even in itself is a hard when you're trying to prep the land to till for your crop. Prepping the land was very difficult. Another hardship is unmet expectations. They had these ideas of what Oregon Territory would be like. Mr. Mint's going to read this excerpt from Hezekiah Packingham.
Thanks, Mr. Volkman. I arrived in the Willamette Valley on the 30th of September, and my calculations are all defeated about Oregon. I found it a mean, dried up, and drowned country. I shall return to the States next spring. Don't believe all that is said about Oregon, as many falsehoods are uttered respecting the country.
Woo. Unmet expectations. And if you're to read more of Mr. Packingham's letter there, he explained a lot of things that he didn't like. He felt that the land in Illinois where he was originally from was just as good, if not better, than Oregon Territory. Finally, we have a last hardship for one more time. Death. I'm going to read from Colonel Eby's diary, 1853, as Mr. Eby, too emotional to read this on his own. And he wrote this in 1853. Kind reader, the hand that penned the most of this volume is now cold with icy chill of death. The loving heart from whence flowed the passages of affection in this volume is forever stilled. But the spirit that animated and pervaded all I trust still lives, more pure and refined than when on earth. A spirit perfect rejoicing around the throne of God and a Savior forever. This, of course, Isaac wrote about his first wife, Rebecca, who died months after their daughter was born in 1853. Another example of death, unfortunately, for Isaac's family was that Rebecca's mother died actually on the trail coming to Whidbey Island. The child that Rebecca birthed, when she died months later, actually died 5 months after Rebecca did. Rebecca died in September. The child died in February. Lastly, Isaac himself was killed by natives who were from British Columbia. And then Isaac's second wife, because he remarried, she ended up leaving. Now, all that Isaac worked for was gone in some ways. So there was hardships, there was a lot of happiness. It really depended on your perspective about was it worth coming here and setting up shop. Thank you. Please go to Edmodo to answer the questions.